Hello, this is my Walkaway video. Um, I'm gonna start out by kind of giving a shout out to another video called, that inspired me to do this, called "In Kavanaugh's Eyes, I Saw My Father." And it's by a young Muslim man who was a fan of Avatar: The Last Airbender. And there's so many inspiring walk away videos out there, but this one was like, stop the presses. It was so riveting. Uh, Anyhow, I'll link to it, but it inspired me to collect my thoughts and to make this video. Okay, so you really have to go back to the 1990s, okay, when I was a kid, okay, late 80s, especially the 90s, though, okay. Um, it was a time of fear and paranoia. Okay, it was not a good time to be a kid. It was not a good time to grow up, in my opinion. It was a terrible time to be growing up. Uh, a phrase we heard a lot was war on. Okay, war on crime, war on drugs, war on juvenile delinquency. Um, and these phrases had started before, but it's really when Clinton got in there that this stuff. I mean, the pedal was absolutely put to the metal. Okay, Clinton just took these things and just floored it, metaphorically speaking. Clinton and the Democrats had an absolute you versus them mentality, or really you group over there versus you group over here. Uh, they people were taught to believe in that with regard to a lot of issues, but really what sticks out to me was criminal justice. The whole war on crime, actually. Um, things like due process, presumption of innocence, you know, um, all those were kind of just tossed. Uh, and instead the model is, scared mothers against, we heard a lot about scared mothers back in those days. Okay, scared mothers against social predators. That guy sitting in that defendant's chair, we're not here to figure out whether or not he's guilty. Okay, he's already a social enemy, and the trial hasn't even begun yet. Uh, and in other settings too. Okay, like the this people talked a lot about Kavanaugh, okay, but it didn't start with Kavanaugh. Um, all the craziness of his accuser, who basically had no story, or answer to everything was, I don't know, I don't know, I don't know. But that's not without precedent. Okay, Clarence Thomas, 1991, very similar thing happened. Uh, where a bunch of really, really, frankly, pretty silly accusations were leveled against him, against a perfectly good man. And instead of, but he, thankfully he managed to squeak by, but he could very well have been derailed by it. It was very silly and crazy accusations about sexual harassment. Uh, by the way, during this time, I was a kid. The feminist movement absolutely mushroomed under this atmosphere of fear and hysteria. I mean, it was a I saw that out right away. Okay, I caught that out right away. Feminists, that it was not about equality. It really was about us versus them. Was it really about revenge for preconceived grievances? Okay, whether it you can argue about whether those grievances are true or not, but really the movement, I caught it out as a child that the movement was really about revenge. Uh, so, uh, it really mushroomed, and it continues to mushroom. We've seen incidents in the new millennium, like Duke Lacrosse, UVA. Now this thing with Kavanaugh, but really when it really mushroomed and picked up was during the 90s. Also, here's the other thing: the whole rehabilitation model for prisoners. The fact that especially people convicted of lesser crimes, like, for instance, just petty crimes, petty theft, that just went out the window. Okay, even, instead you had this completely hysterical model, about all this crap about super predators. We have to bring them to heel. That's what Hillary Clinton said. Uh, and we've got to, Bill Clinton pushed through a federal three strikes law. This is during the time when just about all of the state three strikes laws were rammed through. A lot of this was at the behest of Bill Clinton. This was the beginning of the separation model. Okay, which is that criminals are either, even if they're just petty criminals, pretty much they're either sickos or sickos waiting to happen, or they're becoming sickos steadily. And even if that guy's, and even people who are on trial are most likely guilty sickos, so you can just get rid of due process for the most part. Now, this was the time of the Biden crime bill, okay, named after Joe Biden, Barack Obama's vice president for 8 years, etc. And also, this is when Pell Grants were ended for prisoners. Okay, this was part of the Biden crime bill. And really, it went out the window. One of the best ways that we had for getting somebody out of a life of crime, okay, getting somebody not to be a recidivist, went straight out the window, because it was just assumed, I guess, that even a petty criminal is a sicko deep down inside who just can't be rehabilitated. So let's not even try. So, and higher education for prisoners as a whole, if they didn't have a lot of money, which most of them didn't, was essentially just tossed. There were tons upon tons of moms against groups, moms against Dungeons and Dragons, moms against heavy metal, moms against guns, moms against this, moms against that. One of the biggest pushers of this was Tipper Gore, Bill Clinton's vice president's wife for 8 years. campaigned for him in 2000 for his own presidential run, wrote this really silly book about how heavy metal is destroying our children. I don't remember the name of the book, but it was I actually my it was this really silly and crazy book. Also, the war on guns. There was a Bill Clinton was big on the crackdown against law-abiding gun owners. It was a big part of his whole war on crime. And it was framed in terms of us versus them. You're either with the good, loving Brady mothers, or you're with the child killers who want to shoot up schools. It was framed in black versus white, black and white, us and them, this and that. Just framed in kindergartner terms without any nuances. You're either with us or with the enemy, is how it was framed. So, it really, by the late 90s, just the paranoia in this country was reaching a fever pitch. There were more and more cops in schools. The school to prison pipeline was reaching a fever pitch. The whole boot camp movement for juvenile delinquents, which was really that was reaching a fever pitch, and kids were being thrown in there over really stupid, petty things that a lot of them weren't even guilty of. By the one last thing I'm going to say is that by the time 9/11 happened, as a society, we were extremely ill prepared for such an event to happen, and to be able to deal with it in a rational way. And I absolutely blame Bush for his poor performance during the coming years, but I also have to blame the Clintons and the Democrats because they took our society to a point where everything was simply hysteria and paranoia. And that left us in a position where we were ready to lash out against the Iraqis, even though they had nothing to do with it. Because if you're paranoid all the time, then you're just not thinking. You've learned to be paranoid and hysterical, then you're not thinking rationally. Even when something really does happen, you're not thinking rationally, and you're not able to really deal with it. And so I blame the Clinton and the Democrats for putting us behind the 8 ball for that to happen. So thank you very much, and I encourage you all to walk away.